So I'd like to welcome Leisa Taylor, who joins us on stage now. So Leisa actually is all the way over from over the ditch in Auckland, New Zealand. Lisa's presentation aims to translate how triaging in museums can relate to triaging documentation projects. She is going to give us some strategies for tackling the unknown and creating order out of chaos. Leisa is currently leading a renovation and a new build project at her church in Auckland and has been teaching herself a bunch of DIY skills through renovating her parents' house. She's now curating a paint test spot collection and admits that she might have a hoarding problem herself when it comes to fabric and paint, being an avid sewer. Folks, please give a warm Aussie welcome to Leisa Taylor.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I wanted to start today by honouring my host to Melbourne, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong peoples, the traditional owners and custodians of this land. I want to pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to anyone here who might be Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, or is an Indigenous person in general. Ngā mihi nui, ko ingarangi te whakapaparanga mai, ko Aotearoa te whenua tupu, ko Tamiki Makoro te kainga, ko Leisa Taylor, toku ingoa, tēnei tāta katoa. Kia ora. My name is Leisa Taylor and I'm from Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I've worked as a technical writer for the last 7 years now. And honestly, it didn't start out that way. I never thought this would be my career. I didn't even know that technical writing was a thing. I wanted to be Indiana Jones. I wanted to find hidden treasures in ancient civilizations. But unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to do that. I ended up working as an archaeologist and a museum industry person, but I didn't quite rock the khaki and fedora, and I almost took someone's eye out with the whip. Instead, I found myself a new home in technical writing, and it's a place where I still can make a difference, however small, to someone's day. While my mysteries may no longer be what ancient people ate, it's now about how I can help customers manage their business. And it's a place where I've found I can still encourage more women to start being curious about joining the tech industry and create more opportunities for other voices to be heard. Surprisingly, I'm finding that there's a lot of hidden treasures in technical writing. In fact, it actually has a lot in common with museums. We both work really hard to organize the mess. We both try to make it pleasing and showcase our best spots. We work to educate and engage. And really, for both of us, it boils down to people. For museums, that's their visitors. For us, it's our readers. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a clue about me. I'm kind of curious about all of you, actually. Raise your hand if you are the only technical writer or content person at your organization. Okay, all right. How many of you are in a team of under 5? Okay. Is anyone here under 10, 5 to 10? All right, wild card time. Is anyone in a team of over 10 people? My goodness, you've got a fleet. All right then. Well, for most of my experiences come from working within really small teams. So it might resonate with you more if you are in a smaller team or if you just constantly are fighting chaos gremlins off of you. But I think some of the challenges I'm going to talk about today might resonate with everybody. I have one more question. I promise I won't judge you. Raise your hand if you have visited a museum or art gallery in the last 5 years. Fabulous, I'm so proud. Well, if I missed anybody, as a reminder, museums are this amazing place you can go to where it's just endless halls stacked to the ceilings with objects of all shapes and sizes, things that we've thought were important culturally or are just really pretty to look at. But generally, when you walk through all of this space, you might find yourself getting a bit exhausted because you've seen so much. Well, the reality is most museums only show about 5% of what they actually have. 5%. So that means that 95% of items that they actually have are in storage. And I've personally seen how chock-a-block that storage is. It's absolutely brimming with just insane items. If we take Auckland Museum, for example, they have 4 million items. That's not including their natural science collections. And they have 280 staff that manage the entire museum. So if we're really generous and we give them about 100 collection staff, which is way more than they actually have, they end up with about 40,000 physical items each to manage. And not only do they have to take care of each of those physical items, they also have to maintain them digitally. Each of them needs to have information kept about them as a digital record. They need to always know where an item is, how much it's worth, what conditions it's in, and who donated it. The scale of this work is just mammoth, just to keep minimal detail. It can be actually really overwhelming. I'm wondering if that sounds familiar to anyone else in this room. In technical writing, we're often faced with similar endless documentation needs, and we're trying to keep up with multiple teams of developers who are releasing new features that need UI text updates, release notes, article changes, and error messages. On top of that, we almost have an ever-growing backlog of legacy content that needs to be updated, refreshed. And let's be honest, as we are exploring AI and other places, we're getting more demands to create content in a range of places. So when you've got competing demands and a growing mountain of work, how do you begin? How do you make an impact and manage this chaos? Because often it feels like it can and will swallow you whole. If there's one thing this museum taught me is that you really need to know how to triage, and we can do the same thing with technical writing. You need to learn how to audit, control, learn how to manage your improvements, and then trash. Audits help you to know what you have. You need to control and structure your content with style guides. And then when it's time to dive in and make improvements, you need to figure out how to do that while still doing your BAU. And finally, you need to take out the trash. You need to remove the chaff, the rubbish from your content so that you can see things clearly. So, first, you need to do a content audit, the fun part. In museums, an audit was often a multi-year project because you had to go room by room, shelf by shelf, and figure out what every single item was and match it to your database. The scale of that was insane. You had teams of people that maybe were about 6 people that had to try and get through everything. You could try and match the numbers that the objects had to what you had in the database, which sounds easy enough, except you realize that most of them didn't have a number, or they had the wrong number, or they had 5 different numbers that all matched different records in your database. Just for fun. Before we could even start breaking down what was in each room, we actually needed to get something important in place. We needed to know who our experts were. In museums, you needed that guy who was really into trains. You know, the one that could recite all of the different classes and lines that it serviced and all the colors that it ever had. Or, you know, the person that could look at a serial number for an agricultural cultivator and tell you exactly what model it was, even though half the number had rusted away. Or you needed the person who could look at a military uniform's button and immediately tell you the rank, what war it was from, and even potentially who wore it, just from a button. It's impossible for museums to actually know everything. They collect the world. So we needed to know how to gather our experts. And really, this is kind of true for us as well, right? If you're really lucky, you've got someone on your team who seems to know everything, or at least knows who to ask. But if you're starting out, you might need to figure out a few things. You need to find out who creates your content, and who is an expert for the different areas in your product. You need to learn who's been there for a really long time, because they know where the bodies are buried. You also need to discover who uses your content internally the most. For me, our support team and our product team were the biggest users of our knowledge base, and our internal wiki was the developers. Their knowledge let me pinpoint the areas that needed to be fixed fast. And I also quickly recruited people into being my reviewers. And I had a team of people ready to share any typos, spelling mistakes, or things that just plain didn't make sense. Some of their suggestions were much longer fixes that I wasn't able to get to, but I prioritized quick wins because you get people on board. You get them to start to trust you, and you get them to trust the help. Any progress can win people over. And it also saves you time. When you're asking these people who are experts and other staff about issues they face with the documentation, they know where it's failing. You could make a survey or just have simple chats. But hopefully after you've tried to figure out who your experts are, you should know who to bring your questions to, and you have the beginnings of an ideas of what your damage is. You now need to know what content exists. For museums, where your content exists. For museums, this was a physical space. Sometimes it was a surprise closet that you never knew had things in it. But it was always crammed to the rafters with objects of all shapes and sizes. For us, we need to know where our content exists. So, you got to list out all the different types of content your company creates. This could be training courses, videos, knowledge-based articles, marketing guides, forums and discussion threads, PDF guides, internal wikis, and probably 15 other things that I don't know about. Once you've got your list of all the places your content exists, record what you're responsible for, who is responsible for the other areas, and note down any of those grey zones where it's just not owned by somebody and you don't know who is in charge. Now you know where everything is, and you know what you're responsible for. You need to get an estimate on how much you're actually working with. Ignore any grey areas, because that's someone else's problem for now. If you have time in future, you can always incorporate more responsibilities after you're out of the triage phase, and you can tackle that as a separate project to claim ownership of those things. But for now, you just got to focus on what is your job. For museums, we used to estimate the amount of objects so we could actually figure out what we needed to buy, how many boxes, labels, or tissue paper we needed to get so we could sort of tackle what we had in front of us. While we don't often need to buy physical items, although who doesn't love a good stationery run, we still need to get an idea of how much content we're dealing with, because we need to estimate the volume of work that's ahead of us. So you need to know how many articles are in your knowledge base, how many are published, how many are in draft, how many are only accessible internally, and how many are archived. Now the fun part. You need to find out what quality your documentation is. If you have tens of thousands of articles, your approach is going to be different from someone who's only got 100 or 800 articles. The scale of your content and any time constraints you're actually under are going to change your approach. I went really, really detailed for my content audit. In hindsight, way too detailed. But in doing this process, I got really intimately familiar with every corner of my docs. And I knew every problem before anyone surprised me with it. For my detailed audit, I went and I created a spreadsheet with a row for every single knowledge-based article, and then I recorded their views for the year, a priority score, recorded if they had video content, and then I listed every single issue I found with the page. And I had a lot of issues. I tracked formatting issues, screenshot quality, if it had broken links, spelling errors, incorrect information, if the article was too long or too short or needed to be merged, or if I just thought it needed to be burned in the fires of hell. Now I have another body of work that I'm responsible for, and I do not have the time to do a detailed audit. If you have many, many articles, I would do a meaningful sample of your content. If you have 10,000 articles, doing 100 is not really a meaningful amount. You want to choose as large an amount as you can get away with, really. At the moment, I can actually afford to audit every single page, but I can't do the detailed structure, so I'm going to use something we used in museums, which we called the traffic light system. Red was poor quality, stop. Orange was stable, but great. It was yellow, you think you might be able to make it. And green, good or great quality. You can also use a number scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being really terrible and 5 being great. Just don't mark everything as 3. Come on, commit, guys. Let's avoid marking things as the middle. And I know it's really hard at this point, but don't change anything. Don't start fixing things, because you'll find yourself never finishing your audit. And I know it can be really excruciating when there's just this typo that your fingers are itching to just fix. But trust me, you want to finish your audit. The last thing you need in your audit is a sense of priority. Add a priority score for each article using your analytics, especially page views, as your baseline, and you can then begin to adjust that number depending on other projects you've got going on, stakeholder preferences, or even just a gut feeling that this page is more important than the page views is telling you. You're mostly going to focus on the really high and the really low scores. But alternatively, you can actually try and sort your content into buckets. I love this Venn diagram from John McCrory at 5 Magnitudes. It just makes my soul so happy to look at it. It's broken down into 3 sections, which is content that users want, and generally that's your highest page views. Content that your stakeholders want, and this is content that your support team might need to have, or legally you have to have. It's also a good space for things that are fitting into the strategic vision of your organization. And it's also a place where you get political. So there might be an area that is a favorite of your CEO, or perhaps there's something that your senior leadership really cares about. Providing high quality documentation to the areas most used by your senior leadership, it's just savvy. Because really it lets you foster goodwill and bank it for the future. But don't spend all your time here. The last bucket is pretty much everything that's not that. It's content that exists. Generally this is very low page views and no one's claiming ownership or seems interested in this area. If you can sort your pages into these buckets as well, you get a good sense of priority of what you need to tackle first. Congratulations, you finished your audit. So fast, wow. You now know what you've got, and you know the scale of your problem, and you also know what you need to tackle first. You now need to get some controls in place before you start your mass updating adventure. You're going to need a style guide. See, in museums, we actually used a data entry style guide because we had to catalog so many different types of objects. We had to go from giant locomotive trains to delicate feathers and wings, and my personal favorite, an arc rectifier that's a giant glass balloon filled with liquid mercury. No matter the object, we needed a style guide that could help us catalog the diversity of the entire world. It was a very long style guide. We are no different though. The content that we make gets shared so widely. How we write really matters, and we need to have a high standard for our content. You need to choose a base style guide, and this one should be your Bible. In software, some of the leading style guides are Microsoft, Google, and Apple. Personally, I've used Microsoft Manual of Style as my base. I find it to be comprehensive, easily searchable, and free, and also I get a lot of buy-in from other people in the organization with it. You need to personalize it though, because those are made to be really generic. You need to start coming up with different rules for what you do at your own company. I know, scandalous, you disagreed with Microsoft. But while you're triaging, you're kind of looking for a lightweight style guide, so don't just try and duplicate what is already existing. Come up with things that are specific to you. Try and keep it short, and try and keep it simple, because you want buy-in from everyone else. If you pass them a giant tome at this point while you're triaging, it's never going to get used. You also need to make sure you bring your team on board. Make decisions together. As part of a small documentation team, we make our decisions together about what gets included in the style guide. Even if we disagree, we still have to hash it out together as to what goes in there. But you need to have a decider. You need to have that voice that has the ultimate say. And in my case, that's our manager. But this could be a product owner or a content manager at your organization. And if you need more feedback or ideas, Write the Docs is so good. Everyone will debate with you about anything. It's awesome. They've been so wonderfully supportive as a community of experts. And when you are in a small team, reaching outside of your own bubble is really a good thing to do. Review your documentation and notice if there's already a trend or style. For example, if your existing docs all use title case, guess what you're using now? If you really want to change it, you can make a specific project in future. But for now, you're going to have to try and fit in with what exists. And I know we all want to change what exists because we hate it. They use or don't use the Oxford comma. They insist on starting every page with "in this article," or they have some weird italics situation going on. But if you just create a new standard on top of what already exists, you're just deepening that problem and creating that mess for someone else to inherit later. So now it's time to start changing things. You know that your help is full of mistakes and terrible formatting. Probably. I mean, I hope for all of you that you have gorgeous help that has zero problems and is just art-worthy. But you're probably dealing with something full of mistakes. And you've got a good idea, and you're starting to have that existential crisis as you realize just how much work is happening, and you've got so much in front of you, and you have no way of lifting it up to the standards that are required. But really, you need to start being strategic about how you keep up and make progress, even when you start feeling full of doubt. And we used to have a range of ways of doing this in museums because we had a lot to do. So we did the shelf at a time approach, where you chose a literal shelf and made sure all those objects became better. Here, we use it where we choose a section of the help and fix everything in that area. We create a project for ourselves and work through it. It's appealing because you can make a whole area feel really nice. The downside is everything else might have caught on fire in the meantime. It can also take a lot of time away from your BAU. But it's a powerful way to clearly define a project and make an impact. The surprise on your desk approach. Sometimes you'd walk into your desk at a museum and you'd find an object. Where it came from, how it got there, no one knew. And yes, sometimes it was a flare gun, just for funsies. You could put this item back in storage and quickly move on with your day, but a better approach was to think about how you could make the life better for that object. Maybe you get a box, maybe you add an image, maybe you give it a better description. Your goal was to leave it better than you found it. And we can do the same thing, leave it better than we found it. Every time you come across a page, update it, improve it. It could be as small as fixing a typo, rewriting a sentence or a paragraph to be punchier, or to add one screenshot, or maybe if you're feeling frisky, rewrite the whole thing. This approach can be really slow, but it does affect a wider range of your docs, and any improvement is still an improvement. Over time, this approach has impact because it targets a wide range of documents, including ones that may not be the most popular. And it provides more consistency across all of your docs. When we had a new exhibition planned, we would update all of the objects that could potentially be involved in the exhibition. For documentation, when I have to update a page or create something for a new feature, I crawl through the web. I like phrasing it that way. I update all the pages referenced by the page I'm editing. And when all the pages that link together are improved together, I like to think it makes a better experience for customers when they're jumping through our links that we've carefully put in there. This can be time-consuming, but it's also a really organic way to update your pages because it targets pages that you reference most frequently. And you probably will also find that you're finding all your broken links that linger in the weirdest places. Now, you probably won't just use one of these approaches, but maybe a combination of multiple and other ones that I haven't listed here. But I think the key thing here is to remember something is better than nothing. Perfection can sometimes stand in the way of done. Take any improvement over the perfect masterpiece. My first day at my job at a museum, I made the absolutely stunning decision to wear white. I thought, museums, they're so clean. They'll be fine. Before I knew it, I was crawling under trams and moving cars and planes, and I was like ducking under weird doors in historical villages. And that white shirt was, I want to say, a weird shade of beige. And over the years, whenever I tried to wear white, it just did not happen. And if any of you guys were paying attention into one of the first slides I put up, you might have noticed I'm wearing white. After over a year at Sin 7, I thought, heck, there's no mess here. This is great. I can wear white, totally. It'll be fine. Literally immediately after this photo, I ripped the entire arm of the shirt on a tiny fleck in a concrete wall. You couldn't even see it. I seem to be doomed to a life without white. I just can't seem to avoid the mess. And really, that's what life is, right? We're followed around by it. Our documentation is also never going to be without mess because we're writing about a product that's full of bugs and is sorting out its own stuff. We're working with volume a lot of the time. And when we have an ever-growing pile and we have bigger and bigger issues, we got to remember that it's our job to not just only add things, but that we can do more when we have less. We can do more with less. If you're seeing some of these slides and presentations today where people are doing amazing things, it might be they have less than you. You might be dealing with volume. It's something really important to remember. We can do more when we have less. Don't be afraid to remove, because really there are some things that we should not improve. Our time has to be spent productively, and some articles just aren't worth our time. We need to be willing to throw things away. But how do we know what to throw away? In museums, we call this deaccessioning, and we have lots of rules around it. Because ethically, you can't just take something and flip it into a dumpster and pretend like you never saw it. What you need to do is dispose or deaccession an object is you need to think about its significance. Is it regionally, culturally significant? Is it in poor condition? Is there a duplicate, or are there better examples in your museum? Is this object more relevant for another place? Or perhaps it's outside the scope of what you collect. Maybe it's no longer appropriate to collect this item, for example, human remains. Is this item hazardous or dangerous to staff, visitors, or other objects? And while this process I've listed here is very focused on museums, I found it correlates really well to what we deal with too. Does this page have importance? And some of the ways you can tell this is by view count. Really unpopular pages, it's worth checking to see if the content is actually useful at all. Is it still relevant? Is it badly written? While some pages that are really terrible are worth keeping, it's often a sign that this is information that's been neglected or is not deemed important. It's not been kept up to date, so it's not been valued. Does this information repeat elsewhere? You might find the same content on how to edit a product's name actually exists in a much more popular article on how to create a product. You should not have lots of duplicate articles because it makes it harder to find new and relevant information. Is this more relevant in another place? Perhaps it's better suited in the UI as a tooltip, or maybe it's actually supposed to be a blog on your marketing website. Or perhaps only your staff can set it up, so why are your end users seeing it at all? Content should exist in the place most useful for it. Most suited for it. Otherwise, you can get rid of it. Is it not appropriate anymore? Does covering this topic open you to liability or overpromise something that you just no longer support? Perhaps it describes an old module that no longer exists or that you no longer want to advertise that it exists. Is it hazardous? No, just kidding. Does it break your structure? So does this page create a bad pattern or make it harder for you to structure your knowledge base or your internal wiki? Is it cleaner, neater, and better explained by merging it into somewhere else? Does it create disharmony with all the rest of your pages? It can take time and no small amount of determination, but it is really worth it to simplify your documentation and remove that chaff. When I worked in archaeology, we would dig out all of the soil to get through and find the big pieces, and then we would load all of the dirt into buckets, and you'd heft the bucket up onto a screen and you'd start sieving away, and you would find through all that dirt and mess amazing artifacts. And I think it's something beautiful to think about what we do. We make things clear that would otherwise be murky. We're screening out the dirt so that the beautiful gems shine. Turns out we might all be secretly archaeologists. Maybe the khaki and fedora is also a technical writer uniform? I guess this is my final piece of advice. Something they carry forward from museums, and something mentioned already by Paul and Rhiannon. Empathy. All too often our readers are faceless and nameless, and sometimes this distance can make us treat them with contempt. Why don't they get it? We know better than them. This might even be a company culture. I've definitely heard developers and other people be dismissive about something a user wants, and I am definitely guilty of it too. But your work is for real people who want answers to their questions and their concerns, people who take the time to read your work because it is important to them. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, isn't really about grammar, font, or even the perfect words. Our mission is to help. That's the whole point and why these improvements matter. See, triaging is a really useful tool. That's all it is. You can't lose sight of what it is for. We need to be driven by empathy and care for our readers. So I'm going to finish my talk today with a Māori proverb. It's one we use in museums, but I feel like it resonates really strongly for me about what technical writing's about. He aha te mea nui ki tēnei ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What is the most important thing in the world? The people, the people, the people. Ngā mihi nui, thank you so much for your attention today. I'm looking forward to any questions you have.
Thank you so very much for your presentation there, Leisa. It was fantastic. Folks, do we have any questions? I'm going to start at the front here. The question was about tools and how you actually sort of make sense of the mess, I guess. So what tools did you find most effective, perhaps other than spreadsheets, to sort of manage that?
So the tools that we use at my organisation are quite limited, unfortunately. So the spreadsheets were one of the more powerful ways. At my previous work, we ended up having madcap flair, so we were able to do a lot more work within the product itself to begin to break down how this functions. I used a lot of like HTML scrapers and things like that to pull out a list of all of my topics because I wasn't able to get that directly from my product. Yeah, I think there's amazing tools out there that you can use depending on what you have. The whole point is to try and figure out what are the issues, what is the quality, and how many you have. And there's so many great tools out there that let you do that, including sometimes inside your own CMS or inside your own documentation tools.
So Claire's question was about the tough job of deleting things, which is always really hard to do, and also how you engaged with stakeholders to work out the right things to delete.
Yeah, so this was actually something I took out of my slides because I wanted to make sure I was on time. In museums, we actually have committees that you have to go through when deleting anything. And it's something that I've set up in my own work, is that I have different people that are my experts or my stakeholders for different areas. And so I would often do the work of identifying things that I thought needed to be deleted. And I would work through it with them and have a meeting or have a discussion and say, hey, this is what I think. Take some time to think about it, review it. And occasionally I would get pushback, and then when you pointed out, oh, that information's actually kept here. So if you do all the legwork first and find out, is it duplicated, is it, why are you getting rid of it, giving really detailed reasons, most people are just like, yeah, burn it. I don't need that. And genuinely, when I found people pushed back, they were doing it for the right reason. And they, we don't want to ever lose content that is necessary in any way. So if they did push back, I'd ask them, well, what is important in here that I've missed? And it might be that we take that information and make sure it's kept somewhere else. Just working with them, really, and giving them ownership of it as well.
This is actually on a museum-related note. When you do have to dispose of something in a museum, what do? You just put them in the dumpster at the back, or what do you do?
So there's so many rules around this. When you are removing something from your collection, you need to say, okay, we need to first offer it back to whoever donated it. Sounds easy enough, except they might be long dead. So you have to go and be very good at family history and start trying to contact their descendants and see if they can. If you don't get in contact with anyone, which is often the case, you just have to show that you put reasonable effort into finding them. And then the first option is always trying to keep it at the museum or offering it to another museum. So you might say it's not good for us, but are you keen? Or putting it into your education team. And then after that, you might then try and offer it to local volunteer organizations or people who are passionate about these things. It's a long way before you then try to sell it. Any items that are sold from a museum have to be, the money can't be used for staffing, it can't be used to run the museum, it can only be used to look after collection items, just so to make sure people aren't flicking the money off so they get their CEO a bonus. And then at the very end, if all of that fails, you would maybe potentially put it in the trash. But there's lots of steps and a whole lot of procedures to make sure these items that were donated in good faith are treated respectfully and thoughtfully.
I'd say it would be probably fairly rare for it to actually end up in the trash. Someone would probably want it, right?
There's been a few dumpster divers.
Interesting. All right, folks. Well, I think that might be a wrap for now. Just one more time, folks. Thank you, Leisa. Wonderful. Thank you.